Okay, I'd like to talk to you all about a subject called Narcissistic Victim Syndrome. By and large, most therapists... Oh, thank you. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Paul. Most therapists have never heard the term Narcissistic Victim Syndrome, and it's nobody's fault. It's just that this subject wasn't really known like it's becoming known now. However, constantly you will have victims coming into your room. They won't know that they are suffering from narcissistic abuse. That's something that you may uncover for them. But in order to understand narcissistic victim syndrome, you must first understand narcissistic personality disorder. Otherwise, you won't really be able to equate with your clients. So you need to understand the behaviors and the carnage that they do to their victims. My aim today, I hope if the time doesn't run out, is to link for you the between narcissistic mental health issues and victim abuse. I hope also to introduce you to something called the dark triad, which some of you may have heard of. Go over the 9 criteria for diagnosing a narcissistic personality disorder. But that isn't going to be your task. You won't be in the business of diagnosing, but you will be in the business of working with the victims. And then, of course, I'll go on a little about narcissistic victim syndrome itself. But first, we need to make a little U-turn, and I'm just reminding you, why are we here? And we're here to strengthen the therapeutic relationship with our clients. October happens to be the National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so I think that this is perfect timing for such a talk, really. One of the things that I hear all of the time from victims, all around the world, because I work internationally, is that they cannot find therapists who fully understand what they're dealing with. And this creates a lot of upset for them, and sometimes, unfortunately, they come away feeling even more abused. And I'm very grateful to the IACP for giving me this opportunity to flag that there is a gap in our training. So what is narcissism? Well, the little cat. Every narcissist looks in the mirror, and what they see is the king looking back, or the queen looking back at them. So narcissistic personality disorder is a mental disorder where the individual suffers from an inflated sense of their own importance. They have a deep need for attention and admiration, and they totally lack empathy for everybody. The 21st century has brought with it a narcissistic epidemic, and that is actually official. Research has been done by Tween and Campbell in 2007. They actually wrote the book, The Narcissistic Epidemic, and they did studies with college students. Their database shows that there are sorry, I'm trying to see how do I use this machine. Yes, their database shows that the narcissistic epidemic involves 2 related processes. So one is the rise amongst individuals, and what they found was that when they studied the students on campus, that in 2007, they found that more students were presenting with more traits than in the 80s and the 90s when other studies had been done. So it is increasing. Also, they discovered that there's 3 times as many young people versus older people with this condition, which is very, quite a swap about. We would have expected it to be showing itself later. It always did in the past show itself later. But now that we're finding that youngsters are coming and are being diagnosed. And then the other thing that they noticed was the changes in the culture. So the values, the belief systems, and the practices. So we have a generation that is looking for entitlement. They're looking for instant success, instant fame, instant wealth, instant beauty. And we see this in the culture being reflected in programs like The X Factor, The Voice. We see it being reflected in cosmetic surgery and instant wealth. Well, everybody is an entrepreneur these days, even 14-year-olds. This is reflected, television reflects what is actually going on in our culture. It's not the other way around. And you will be aware of, there are many more programs than the ones that I put up there, that like CSI, Criminal Minds, Love Hate, our Irish program, and the other Irish program, 24 Hours to Kill. These are actually crime and punishment programs where you meet the never repenting narcissist. You actually get a view of them. Are we really narcissistic generation? What do you think? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. The epidemic has reached into all corners, right across the world. It hasn't missed Ireland either. So it has reached the rich and the poor, males and females, and the young and old. Actually, it is actually a pandemic, and that's not an exaggeration. And although a lot of, if you are researching, you'll probably read that males would number at 70%. That's not my findings in my work. I'm finding it's roughly 50-50. And what the research has showed that the biggest increase today is in women and children. So women are catching up as fast. It's part of the cultural changes, women in power positions, earning money, all that kind of thing, trying to get to the top of the ladder in a male world, all of that adds to it. I'd like to give you a little background of my own story. Here we have the Beauty and the Beast. And I grew up in a household with a fledgling psychopath for a brother. I loved him, I adored him. But he was the proverbial Jekyll and Hyde personality. So that meant that there were times when he was absolutely adorable, loving and cherishing and all those things. He could be charming, very charismatic, seductive, manipulative, and at times very, very dangerous. By the time he reached 30, he had put 3 of his siblings in intensive care, and I was one of those as well. He went on to have a large family of 9 children, and basically they were living in a cult situation with the father, the guru, and literally it was a war zone. Because of growing up from so young, literally from birth, he was 4 years older than me. He would have been the baby when I came along. And I was primed and conditioned to basically dance the convoluted narcissistic dance that all victims learn to do. And sorry, just lost my thought there. What I developed was actually very, very clever defense mechanisms. So I would have been your consummate pleaser, your codependent. I was the one who took responsibility because he took no responsibility for anything. It was always somebody else's fault, mostly mine, whatever went wrong. So I became actually the dedicated keeper of his moods. And I became manipulative myself. I learned how to, at times when I'd see that look coming on him, I'd be able to appease him and turn it around. Some of the time, not all of the time. It's not all bad. I mean, it's made me a good negotiator. in life, and it probably was my best schooling for becoming a therapist, probably. So I was primed and conditioned from young, and you will find that with a lot of your clients that are coming in. The unfortunate thing about that is once you're primed, you become a magnet for other narcissists. You're like, literally they're attracted to you like a moth is to the flame. Because they want people who are empaths, they want people who are going to let them have all the limelight. I always learned to live in the shadow. So there were prices I had to pay for all of that. So you may be wondering, so what makes you the expert, Christine, standing up here talking to all of us? Well, I don't consider myself to be an expert. I'm learning all of the time. And I'm very dedicated to all of my research. But just to give you a little picture of what I have been doing, the last time I was victimized was about 10 years ago. And it was a friend. It was not the worst. 4 times, in fact, I've been a victim. It wasn't the worst, but it was the one that blew me apart, which was great. That person did me a favor, actually. So what it did was it made me go back into therapy. Before I went into therapy, I started my research to find out what the hell is happening to me that I keep attracting this situation to myself. And I asked probably the best question I ever asked in my life, and that was, the common denominator in these 4 incidents was me. So what am I doing that could be in adding to it or creating it? So I got myself into therapy and I started working again. I could only get so far with my research. There's wonderful research on the internet. I could only get so far by looking at the discipline of psychotherapy. So I actually decided to study criminology and forensics, and went and did diplomas in those subjects. And they were where I got most of my knowledge, I have to be honest. But I can add it to the knowledge also that's coming from the research from psychotherapy as well. I then started, about 4 years ago, I started a website called narcissisticbehavior.net. And on it I put articles, free articles for therapists that they could look it up. I also, on my website, there's also radio interviews that I did. I've become quite well known in America, although I'm not really known here, which is quite ironic, really. And I got the opportunity to talk on a health radio station in America, and it's been very successful. But they're on my website as well for anybody to listen to. I then found people contacting me from all around the world, and as was said earlier, I did work in St. Brendan's psychiatric hospital with Professor Ivor Brown and his team for 4 years. So I was working in a trauma unit, so I knew that bit. And then this year I actually wrote my first book. I'm in the process of writing the second one, but the first book is really all about the perpetrator, literally, and showing the different levels. The second book is going to be all about the victim, but I'm finding that one harder to write because it's getting me. So be patient with me and it will come. I know some people need to see pie charts and things like that. I'm not particularly a person that needs that, but for those people that are, I'm just going to point out to you that my website has had about 700,000 visits. That's how widespread this is. So if you look at this area here, this is America, the blue. And from America, I've had almost 500,000 visitors. That's the highest. United Kingdom, 57,000 1,000, and in Ireland it's almost 10,000 visits I've had. But I'm only getting known here, really, to be honest. But it hasn't escaped Ireland. It's here too. So do therapists know enough about the effects on the victim? Actually, they don't. And the nearest we come to understanding any of this possibly is in the term of domestic violence. I'm not particularly happy. The work that is being done in that area is phenomenal, it's fantastic. But I'm not personally very happy with that label anymore, because it suggests that it only happens in the home. And it doesn't. It happens in the workplace. It happens in friendships. It happens in any social gatherings. It could be happening in your church, in your bank. What's the banks? What has happened to all of us in that? It is to do with pathological narcissistic behavior. So clients really, really, really do need help now. And I have decided to cut back on my client work and get out there and teach before all my energy goes, because I'm nearer to 70 now than anything. And I reckon that, I've got a little time left to maybe pass on what I have learned to other people, because victims need you, and they need you badly. And I've been working for quite a long time, but I'm reaching one person at a time, and it's not enough. It's just not enough. And I was working internationally, so just to let you know that you can do that too, that working by Skype. Now, I didn't know if that would work, but I had people that were so desperate in different countries saying, I can't find anyone, that I said, well, look, let's have a try. And actually, it actually worked very, very well. And then they're able to go off, once we kind of get the bones of it, and I'm able to educate them as well what's going on for them, they're able to then go to their local therapist and deal with their codependency or whatever it is that they might want to sit with somebody with. So, it's another option, another way that you might be able to work as well. Can you spot a narcissist? No, you can't. They look more normal than normal, actually. They're funny in the beginning. When you first meet them, they're funny, they're witty, they're charming, they're passionate, they're exciting. Their confidence makes them quite sexy, whether they're males or females, their energy. But all that changes when they manage to hook you. And then you see the Mr. Hyde come out, whether they're males or females. And so the only way to really avoid them is to understand and to be able to recognize when you're in the company. And they're everywhere. And, I still like them because they're exciting. But now I've learned how not to get hooked. I don't get drawn in, sucked in and hooked like I used to, and want to rescue them all. That was my job. The DSM, that's the Diagnostic Manual for Health Services. They talk quite well. You can read up on narcissistic personality disorder, but they're only really good for looking at the classical narcissist, so that's the lower level, because there are different levels. But they talk about 9 criteria, and they're not separate. They kind of, I've kind of linked the lines. They're kind of linked all together, and they can go from one to the other in 5 minutes. They can be going from one to the other. Don't worry about trying to take it all down. I'm getting this filmed, and it will be up on my website shortly, so that you'll be able to replay it again for yourselves. So I'll run through them, but it will be quite quickly. In order to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality, you have to have 5 at least of the 9. But actually, if you meet somebody who has 4, they can equally do quite a lot of damage to you. So a near narcissist can harm you as well as a blown one. But of course, you won't be trying to diagnose them anyway, so don't be worrying about that. So, grandiosity. I believe that grandiosity is the cornerstone of narcissism because it causes the individual to exaggerate their talents, their capabilities, their achievements, and all in very unrealistic ways. And this, of course, leads to an unrealistic sense of superiority. In their world, there are two types. There's superior and there's inferior. Of course, they are superior. You might be superior for a little while if you have something that they want from you. But as soon as they get that from you, now they lose all respect for you, and now you're now become inferior. And that's just the way it is. And then they will view you with disdain, and it won't be pretty. Power and control. Well, they seek to dominate every situation, every individual, every group. They have to be the center of attention. And they use power and control to exploit and devalue and prey on other people with no remorse, because they have little or no empathy. They employ two twin mechanisms that are called idealization and devaluation. So when they first meet you, if they like you, especially if they think you've got something that you might be useful, you might bring them some clients, or you might, you might run a workshop and they want to do a workshop and they, can I borrow your notes, or whatever it is, doesn't matter. You'll be in the idealized stage at that type. There's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect. And they will make you feel that. They will reflect that to you. But when they have what they want, they then go into the second one, which is actually to devalue. And that is the beginning of the end of you with them. And they will devalue in all sorts of ways. Your self-confidence, your worth, everything will start going downstream. Now you imagine if you live with somebody like this, not somebody that you only have to meet as a colleague for a couple of hours, in the workplace, what that is like if your boss or a co-worker happens to be narcissistic, and after your job, which they often are, and then they will get to know all you know if you let them, and then they will then start to eradicate you bit by bit. And of course, most often the victims have no idea what is actually happening. They don't know what's going on. Special, they actually see themselves as being very, very special, very privileged people, and they literally have got the God complex. They demand constant praise and approval from others, and if they don't get it, they'll punish you. So there we have the joker, getting in the middle, having the attention. So you will have to learn, like I did, to live in the shadow of your narcissist, whether it's a mother, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a spouse, co-worker, doesn't matter. They have to have center stage. The reason why they use the devaluing, the idealization is it gives them actually access to what's called narcissistic supply. This is important. When we talk of narcissistic supply, we're talking about anything and anybody that actually puts them up. So if, your role if you're with a narcissist will be to tell how wonderful they are. They're the greatest. And this guarantees them narcissistic supply. But they're constantly, you'll last a certain amount of time and then they're on to the next. So if you're in a marriage with it, it's not unusual that if, I'm not really picking on men because women are equally as bad, and I'm talking about both when I'm talking, but you might get lots of marital affairs and things like that going on, because they have to be the center of attention. They need the rush of the first stage where everything is perfect. But of course, as the relationship gets real, you're bound to challenge each other. That's part of being real. They don't take it as growth. They take that as criticism, abandonment, and rejection. And they're deep core wounds of the narcissist. So you will probably then start being punished. Sense of entitlement. Well, they actually believe that they're entitled to everything that they get, and it's automatic. And it makes having a relationship with them very, very difficult, because they always have to be the one. So it's not an equal relationship. You'll find yourself doing, as a victim, you are giving, while they are taking. And that is the relationship, and the nature of it. Exploitative. They'll exploit every single situation that they can. And they really are the me people, absolutely. They play absolutely no value on open, fair, and honest exchanges. That's nothing to do with it. And they will use fear and obligation and guilt to hook people. Lack of empathy. I see them like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. He's missing a heart. And so they're cold, they're contemptuous, they're brittle, they're inconsiderate and tactless. People are there to be used. And this lack of empathy gives way to a lot of their other behaviors, such as pathological lying, shallow emotions, their chilling violence, and it's not always physical, as in my case with my brother, but it was also psychological abuse that I would have experienced as well. Envious. And look at him with his lolly. He asked for the lolly, but he doesn't want the lolly now that he wants the lolly, but he wants the ice cream as well. And this is the way they are. They're never content with what they have. They actually, anybody who possesses anything that they don't feel that they have, makes them feel inadequate. So it might be your brilliant, it might not be, it might be looks, but it might be your intellect, or it might be literally you have a nicer house. Whatever it is can trigger envy. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be even small things. And this triggers their shame and resentful longings, and that sends them really into a rage. So they're likely to go into a rage if she won't give him at least a lick of that ice cream, he's going to go into a rage, but he'll probably want all of the ice cream. They're haughty and arrogant, and their attitude is that I'm one of a kind, I'm better than everybody else. They're arrogant, they're haughty, their sense of entitlement leads all of their thinking to put them above all others' rules. They have their own rules. Stand in line does not apply to them. They want to come and stand up with the one who's up there. And that's what they do. So that's the 9. And so, we all laugh at Mrs. Bouquet, but she is actually your classical narcissist. They're quite benign. In other words, they're not going to make your life easy. Think of her poor husband. That's what you're in for. That's the job. But in reality, they're not funny at all. They're actually very damaging. So you imagine a narcissistic mother. A narcissistic mother needs the attention. The roles are reversed with the children. The children will be mothering the narcissistic mother and meeting her needs. The mother will live through any of the gifts and talents that their child might have. If they're, good at dancing, or if they're, these pageant queens and things like that. They're living through the child. So the child has a lot to live up to, absolutely. Very often, it's not unusual for narcissistic mothers to look like they're brilliant. Now, to the outside world, the children will be well turned out. They'll look, they're their objects. They're going to be well looked after, and they'll be turned out really, really well. But it's not unusual that you'll get, as soon as the child starts developing their own ego, the mother rejects them. And that can be as little as 2. At 2 years old, where before that they might have been very touchy-feely and cuddly with the child. When the child starts saying no and having his own little temper tantrums, very often that mother will go on to maybe having another child. It's not unusual for them to have quite large families, but they love the baby all the time. But it is because they can't deal with somebody not agreeing with them or making demands of them. The dark triad, this is not a term taken from therapy. This would come from criminology. And basically it's composed of 3 different components. So we're now getting into looking at the narcissist at different levels. So the 3 levels are, coming from criminology, would be narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Now, in psychotherapy terms, we don't really use those terms, but what we would use would be the narcissist, the malignant narcissist, and the psychopath. And whereas the narcissistic personality disordered individual will be most likely be the domain of mental health psychiatrists or whatever, they won't be for the likes of us for diagnosis, because we're not able to diagnose them. But I can tell you, the victims are very much the domain of the psychotherapist. That's where they come. And each narcissist can have many, many victims. Many. Probably an easier way to understand the dark triad is through the Russian doll method. So if I show you here, if we take the smaller one as the classical narcissist with the 9 criteria, but we're going to now go on to the malignant one. It's like putting that 9 in there. And now this one will have its own extras as well. For a start, they're going to be antisocial. They're very antisocial. They are also very sadistic. They take pleasure out of harming. And they are paranoid. So they really believe everybody's out to get them. So their motto is, I'll get you before you get me. If we go up now to the psychopath, we take the 9 criteria, and then we take the others, being sadistic and being paranoid and antisocial, place that in there, and now we have to add also brain damage. There's brain damage with psychopathy. Their brains are wired differently, or they may have come into the world with brain damage through the birth process, anything. My own brother fell out of a window, an upstairs window, when he was 2 years old, and he fell onto concrete head first. So he actually had frontal lobe damage, which is all about control and that kind of thing. So he would go from being absolutely adoring and loving and sweet into literally a madman, literally, in a blink of an eye, because he had no control. That impulse was rogue, was wild. Degrees of narcissism. So we're looking at, I've put up there Paris Hilton, and you say, oh, that sweet little girl, why are you putting her up there? Well, she would be your classical narcissist, everybody dance attention on me, etc. Probably having a relationship with her would probably be quite difficult, because it'd be one-sided. But she's not going to kill people, probably, put it that way. She's benign. However, when you look at the others that I've put up there, and there are many I could have put up there, by the way, Jimmy Savile, you all know. We don't know that he has killed anyone, but we can't rule it out. Myra Hindley, one of the worst women in probably was the 60s, serial child killer. I mean, do any of them look like monsters or terror? They don't. They're all nice-looking people. Ted Bundy, he killed 33 women. And Graham O'Dwyer and Alexander, they have been in the news this year. This year, they were actually jailed for life for killing 2 Irish girls. O.J. Simpson, handsome, very talented, but they can do huge damage. So they don't look like monsters. That's a myth. So now let's get on to the Narcissistic Victim Syndrome. So when the client comes into the room, what will they look like? Well, they will look pretty much like any other client coming into the room, to be absolutely honest. They won't have 2 heads or anything like that. They often present with something very mundane. Like they might come in and they might say, I'm not reaching my fullest potential as an adult, or I get panic attacks. And so, you're looking at that. But as their story unfolds, if you understand what you're looking for, little light bulb moments will be going off you. Oh, they had a controlling father, or they had a controlling mother, or whatever. And you'll be able to actually, bit by bit, start to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I can tell, when I was doing training to be a therapist, I did many schools of training, which meant many therapy sessions in different schools. Never, ever, ever was it said to me that I had been a victim of narcissistic abuse or actually a psychopath. That was never mentioned. And it was the bit of the puzzle that was missing for me, that I could never quite make the sense of it all. Because I'm not a stupid person. I am quite a strong person. But my own behaviour baffled me at times when I'd be in various people's company, how I would withdraw, how I would get shy, how I'd get smaller. And of course it would be that I would be noticing that actually I'm in the presence of a narcissist, but I didn't know it really. I think we've come to the end of our time. We're almost there. And I'll quickly, one of the things that you might find that, when you're working with these victims, you may discover you might discover Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding. So you need to know a little about that. You don't have to be experts. You are already experts. You have most of the knowledge already. But there are a few things you need to add. Cognitive dissonance will be a huge part of how they survive. Because I love you, but I hate what you're doing to me. And you only do that because you love me. And all of that stuff. Codependency, gaslighting impact, that's a huge one, and I wish I could go into it with you, but I can't. And post-traumatic stress or complex post-traumatic stress. And there is a difference between the two, which would be useful for you to know the difference. Anybody who wants to know a little bit more can go on to my website. There are articles there for you, as I said, and they're just some of the articles and the interview with America. So I'm sorry I've rushed through that. I mean, it's a huge subject, but if you're interested in knowing more, I've left outside, if you'd like to leave your name and your email addresses, I can contact you if you want and let you know about, you can contact me if you wish.
Can you take a few questions?
Oh, yes, questions and answers.
You can take 3 questions, just.
Okay, a question at the back. Do you want this?
I'm okay, I think. Thanks, Christine. Absolutely fascinating. Really.
Thank you.
sometime.
Yes.
I'm convinced. So definitely talking about a one-day workshop. So
Okay.
watch PCI College website.
Okay.
And
And, you know, thank you very much. And to add to that, you know, please hold on to the fact that you are professionals. You have most of what you need already. But you can learn the other bits in your CPD programs.
Well, I actually wanted to ask you a question as well.
Okay.
That's a comment,
Okay.
and I think it's important because I think you do need to get this stuff out more, so great. I wanted to question something as well,
Okay.
tied in what you said there. The assessment part, you know, diagnosing the various forms of narcissism is something that has to be learned. No matter who does it, they have to learn it. A
Yeah,
psychiatrist has to
that's
learn
right.
it. I also wouldn't always assume that a psychiatrist
That they know.
well just because they're a
Yes.
psychiatrist. Why would you think that psychotherapists can't do it? Do you mean we just don't tend to, or that we can't learn it, or am I being
No, I just mean, probably what I was meaning was you're more likely to get the victim coming into you. But by knowing the narcissistic behavior, you can now begin to understand what the victim has been, the psychological warfare they have been under. And that's, thank you, that's a very important thing. We also need to know how to recognize, because we do get narcissists come into the therapy room as well, especially if you're doing couple counseling, and to be able to recognize when you are dealing with that, because they can actually, they're very hard to work with, and I tell you, they don't take prisoners, they will attack you, very much so, and bring you down if they choose to, as a therapist. Because you're superior and they don't like that, and eventually you'll challenge them, and that's when they'll come in and they will try to annihilate you as well. So you're better off to know when you're working with them as well.
Is there another?
Just to ask if you have any key piece of advice with regard to working with the victim.
Yes. I think if there was only one thing that I could give my clients, it's validation. And that was the bit I never got. Nobody's fault, I'm not blaming anybody, but it left me with that piece of the puzzle missing. If you can validate that actually they're not mad, because a lot of the time they're told they're mad, they're stupid, who'd want you? By their narcissist partner or friend. And validating their experience is like giving them the key and educating them. I would spend a lot of time educating my clients, and I would encourage them to go onto every site. You know, not just take my word for it. Go and research everybody.
Okay, so just one here, Christine. Yeah.
Christine, thank you so much. I am so delighted about so much trauma, and you even mentioned in relation to your brother. And I must say, in my own training and even for the workshops on the whole area of narcissistic personality, it actually wasn't often addressed or included,
Yes.
which I just found fascinating. I'm wondering, from your own research or from the international research,
Mm-hmm.
how important now do you feel, for example, that whole, not just the history of maybe developmental trauma or other trauma, but now with the whole increase in the neuroscience,
Yes.
maybe MRI and all of that,
Yes.
how important do you think? Because I think certainly, possibly in Ireland, we don't really, to be honest, we're not at that stage yet.
Yeah.
But I wonder in your research.
I would say that I didn't really learn post-traumatic stress in my training programs. Yes, it was mentioned, but I didn't really learn about it. But now that's a while back since I qualified. It might be very different in your training programs today. But I learned it in St. Brendan's Hospital with Ivor Brown being my supervisor for 4 years and on his team. But having learned it, I would say it's really a wonderful tool for you to have. It's not above anybody. It's not a mystery. But it's actually understanding when people are disassociating, that you can catch it, but that you can give them exercises that they become more and more aware of when they're doing it and why they're doing it and how they do it. This is all, and teaching them how to self-soothe. They're all simple but wonderful ways of working with people. But you don't have to be Einstein. So don't be put off by that, by the terms that I've used.
Thank you, Christine. Just on behalf of IACP, and I'm sure all of you here, I would say it's been a great privilege and something that we really need. Some